Hey, welcome and thanks for joining us on World Inside. I'm Michel Yuan, sitting in for Tian Wei tonight. Coming up on tonight's show, Brazil suspended President Dilma Rousseff defends herself as she faces a trial in the Senate, saying her impeachment amounts to a coup. Rousseff called on lawmakers to reject ending her presidency, but some observers say the Senate is likely to oust Rousseff. What are the chances she could still survive? What will her impeachment mean to Brazil's economy? And how will supporters and opponents react? Plus, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry visits India as Washington and New Delhi appears to be moving closer together in economic and military cooperation. What will closer ties between the U.S. and India mean to Asian-Pacific region? And what are some of the implications for relations between China and the U.S., as well as relations between China and India? Great to have you with us. We start in Brazil, where the impeachment trial of Dilma Rousseff has shifted the nation's focus following the conclusion of the 2016 Rio Olympic Games. The suspended president may have given her final speech to the Brazilian Senate on Monday. Now, she has been accused of breaking budget laws, but Rousseff says her conscience is clean. The impeachment trial for her is still going on.
Supporters of Dilma Rousseff remain defiant, despite the odds against the suspended president. A few hundred people showed up on Monday morning in front of Brazil's Senate building to say they still have hope the Brazilian president will return to power and avoid a conviction by two-thirds of the lawmakers.
We are here to show our support for Dilma Rousseff and to say that even if this coup passes in the Congress, we won't accept it in the streets. We may not be in huge numbers here today, but there are people who have always been with Rousseff, and even more so now that she is the victim of an impeachment.
Inside the Senate, the suspended president and former Marxist guerrilla was defiant in her own defense. She reiterated she's done nothing illegal. Speaking for about 30 minutes, she accused senators of being part of a legislative coup.
Democracy is being violated and an innocent person is being punished. This trial was brought forward by people who make false accusations. We are one step away from a serious rupture of Brazilian institutions and a coup d'etat.
Dilma Rousseff just made things worse for herself because she's making false statements before the Senate, including comments about a coup d'etat, which is also a crime.
After the president's opening statement, senators posed questions, but most of them repeated positions already taken by each side. Rousseff supporters say she offered a strong defense, but they acknowledged it will be tough to convince enough senators not to convict.
I think this speech will help to acquit Dilma Rousseff before the eyes of history. Facts are now replacing all the lies.
Rousseff is accused of using money owed to state banks to bolster spending during an election year in 2014. If the Senate convicts Rousseff, as expected, her vice president, Michel Temer, will be sworn in to serve the rest of her term through 2018.
Now, for more on the impeachment trial of Dilma Rousseff, we're now joined in our Beijing studio by Jiang Shixue, Vice President of the Chinese Association of Latin America Studies and Professor of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In Sao Paulo, we have Charles Tang, President of the Brazil-China Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And also in Washington, we have Mary Cruz McGowan, Vice President of the National Economists Club. Welcome to you all. All right, so Dilma Rousseff has made her final defense in front of the Senate on Monday, and the result of the impeachment is expected to come out on Tuesday, 11 p.m. local time, which is about 12 hours from now. So let me start with a question. What are her chances? Mr. Jiang with me in the Beijing studio first.
Well, I would say that her chances is quite slim. But let me tell you that just several minutes ago, many of my Chinese colleagues here in China say that, well, this kind of impeachment is a victory of democracy. But I would argue that this kind of political game is really a dangerous thing to the political stability in Brazil. So I would say that stability in Brazil is very, very important.
Victory for democracy. Charles, would you agree with that? What do you think are the chances of Dilma Rousseff staying?
I believe that her chances of remaining as president are almost nil. She was able to convince 2 senators to vote on her behalf, but you know, they already have 53 senators who declared against her, and there's 8 that have not decided yet. And I believe that they only need one, the opposition or the actual government only needs 1 senator's vote to have her impeached for good. And I do agree that in most countries, if you try to remove a president, you're going to have a civil war. You're going to have shooting. In Brazil, it shows the strength of the country being ruled by the rule of law, governed by the rule of law, and it's you know, under the presidency of one of the president of the Supreme Court, and the impeachment proceedings are being held without having anybody firing shots or killing each other.
So Ms. McGowan, let me bring you into the discussion now. How do you judge Dilma Rousseff's performance and her chances now?
Well, I agree with my colleagues. Her chances are very slim of staying in power. But I think the full impact, the full reaction of the people is yet to be seen. We have to see what happens once she's indicted, once she stops being the president, because as they say, they only need 1 more vote. There is one side that they say this is a political elite, and the other side say they represent the people, the country. Once this happens, we are going to see which side is right. Because if we have a lot of protests, if we have violence, if we have too many people going out on the streets to protest, then we will see that maybe this Congress does not represent as much as they think. Maybe it is an elite. Or if we see the opposite, that there's calm, maybe a few protesters and nothing else happens, then we will say that in this case it was a democratic movement, otherwise it wasn't. So I really think we have to wait until this happens to see actually, you know, what, if this is an elite or not, if this is a coup d'etat or not.
Mm-hmm. So essentially, her impeachment requires 54 of the 81 senators, a 2/3 vote, and some senators already predicted around 60 will vote yes to oust her. So it's expected by many that she will be removed from the office by the week. However, she herself said in front of the Senate that the initiative on her resignation was a plotted coup against her. She said the country's elite manufactured charges against her. What do you think of this, Mr. Jiang?
Well, I just don't want to use this word, a political coup. This word is very too strong. I would prefer to say it's a political crisis. But for Brazil, it's really a sad reality. If we cannot deal with this kind of political crisis as soon as possible, the country will be sunk into a crisis deeper and deeper. And the possibility is that there will be political crisis and economic crisis that will push this great country in South America into deeper and deeper crisis. That will be a great sad reality.
And Charles, what do Brazilian people think? I mean, Dilma Rousseff, she's got opponents, but she's also got supporters. How do people look at things now?
Well, I think that, you know, since she was removed from office, the economy has already started to react. And I think that after her definite impeachment today, we will see the stock market growing, and we will see the economy starting to grow again. Brazil's an enormously wealthy country, and once we have the political crisis put aside, then the economy will be free to grow again, and the political crisis will no longer affect the economy. However, as my colleague said, once the crisis or once the impeachment is defined, we may still have a lot of turbulence, because the people who favor her will not just lay down and take it quietly. And the people who are governing now, the President Temer will become the definite president, and he will travel to China to participate in the G20 in Hangzhou. In fact, I'm leaving tonight to go to China as well for the events that will happen, the business and commercial events that will happen for this occasion. So I think that Brazil is on the way to recovering its economy.
All right, before I get to Ms. Magowan, let me read our viewers this. If Rousseff is voted out, she would end her term 2 years early. And before talking about a Brazil without her in office, let's now learn more about her. Now, Rousseff is an economist and the 36th president of Brazil. She's the first woman leader of the country. She first assumed office in 2011 and then got re-elected in October of 2014. She's suspended in May of this year following allegations of misconduct. And over the past few years, Brazil's GDP growth sharply declined from 3.9% in 2011 to a negative 3.8% in 2015, a recession called by some as the worst in a century. And as an economist, she blamed the slowdown in trade with China, monetary tightening in the U.S., and a severe drought in Brazil for the country's woes. Ms. Magowan, do you agree with that?
Well, partially because yes, they have a very close relationship, commercial relationship with China, and China economy started decelerating itself, and so they buy less from Brazil, and that had an impact. But I will not blame everything in that aspect. There are many aspects. I think one of the main problems that Brazil has is that they don't make it easier to invest, especially foreign investment. I think they have, the bureaucracy is very big. The requirements to start a business are incredible. And I think they have to work on that, and that will depend on the next president. And it's very important also when they get engaged on trade, whether it's with China or other countries, they generally export primary goods when they should concentrate more in exporting secondary goods and more manufactured goods, more technical based services and stuff like that. And I don't see that happening at the speed I was expecting from a country that it's so large. They have a lot of natural resources, but they also have a lot of smart people, educated people, and I think they should use them better.
Can I just add one point? Well,
go ahead, Professor.
I would say that it's wrong to blame everything on China. As a matter of fact, China has made great contributions to the Brazilian economy in the past several years. It is true that the prices of the commodity on the world market has been declining, but that decline is caused by the manufacturers. You cannot blame this on China. And my friend Charles Tong will agree with me that the economy is caused, the economic crisis is caused mainly by the so-called Brazilian cost. You know, by saying Brazilian cost, we are talking about the kind of a terrible infrastructure, high interest rate, high cost of getting loans, all kinds of things. Can you believe that shifting a bottle of wine from the winery in Brazil to the port in Brazil is higher than the cost from transporting this same bottle of wine from Brazil to China? So that's the basic reason for the Brazilian economic crisis.
So Charles, do you agree with what's been said? What has led to the economic crisis of Brazil? I mean, its economy is hurting because of the drop in commodity prices. The unemployment rate is high, inflation is skyrocketing, and the factor of China into this. What do you think?
Well, China has always been very helpful to the world economies. You take a look at Africa, where China, you know, Africa was a lost continent before China started investing massively because the former colonial masters stripped Africa of its wealth. And China changed Africa from a lost continent to a continent of hope with its massive investment in infrastructure and so on. It's true that the Brazil cost, like my colleague said, is very damaging to Brazil. And the government of President Temer has already addressed this situation. The vision that he is, you know, presenting to the Brazilian people is that we have to reduce the cost to fit the budget. We have to, you know, reduce the taxes, you know, make the labor laws more flexible because they haven't changed one comma since 1943. and they're very, very costly. So I believe that once President Dilma is settled, the impeachment is settled, I think that the new government will take some very positive, non-ideological, political and economic measures that will help improve the economy. I believe that will happen, and I think that you cannot blame the world economy on everything. Sure, the lower cost of commodities and petroleum has affected Brazil, as it has affected many other countries that did not go into such an economic crisis. So I think there were mistakes made. There should be restructuring as the new government is planning to do, and I believe that Brazil will recover itself, not immediately, but fairly quickly. And a lot, the Chinese companies are investing massively into Brazil, which is helping the Brazilian economy a lot.
Now, Charles, I got to ask you this, because if Dilma Rousseff is impeached, the now interim president, Michel Temer, will take over. And like we mentioned before it came on air, he will probably represent Brazil, and he will be the new face, represent Brazil, come to China, to the world leaders, to the G20 summit. Do you stand by his policies? What do you think of his policies, the social economic policies?
I think that his, economic policies, I think he's on the right track. As you know, his Minister of Finance, Enrique Meirelles, succeeded me at the Bank of Boston and became the president of the Bank of Boston before becoming the Minister of Finance. And I think he's very, very capable. I think that he has the right ideas. I think that the whole philosophy of the new government of privatizing everything, all the assets, because the state is not a good manager, reducing costs, making the labor laws less onerous and more flexible. And as far as the social area is concerned, President Temer has insisted to show the people of Brazil and to the whole world that he is continuing with all the social benefits and policies of the Labour Party, which did in fact improve the life of many of the miserable and the poor people of Brazil. And I think this government, the new government, will continue to do this.
All right, I see Ms. McGowan shaking her head. With all this said, Mr. Temer's polling is not high. He's not more popular than Dilma Rousseff. Given the polling, he is equally despised, if not more, as she was. Why is that, Ms. McGowan?
Well, the problem is he belongs to the same party. He was her vice president. Let's not forget about that. We are talking about the same political party. But what I was thinking when I was shaking my head is that you cannot implement capitalist measures, which is what my colleagues were, suggesting, and at the same time have a huge socialist machinery and trying also to feed that. It's either or. Sometimes you have to make choices. They have systemic problems, they have cultural problems, they have a huge problem with income inequality. They have to address that. It's not just that continue feeding the poor instead of training the poor, instead of educating the poor. It's not giving them everything for free, because when you do that, you keep them poor forever. And that is not something that will work. Brazil has had many waves, let's say, many changes in economy. I heard about the Brazilian miracle, I don't know how many times. They recover and then they fall again, and they fall even worse than when they were before. Why? Because they didn't address the structural, the systemic, and the cultural problems that they have. As long as they do that, they are not going to recover on a long-term basis.
Mr. Jiang, will Brazil recover after this political crisis? With G20 summit coming in just around the corner, Brazil reportedly aims to woo China investment during the upcoming summit. How do you look at things now?
Well, my answer would be yes and no. Yes, that means that if the political crisis can be resolved as soon as possible, that will be a kind of political condition. That will be better political condition for its economy. But on the other hand, we must understand the U.S. Fed is likely to increase its interest rate, and that's not good for its economy. And also the prices of the commodities on the world market are still quite low. So there are both positive and negative factors for the future of the Brazilian economy. However, having said that, I would say that China and other countries might make more investments in this great South American country. The investment opportunities are so huge. So if suppose that China can offer a certain kind of help for Brazil, then that would be nice.
All right, we've got to leave it here. Many thanks for all your perspectives. Professor Jiang Shixue joining me in the Beijing studio, Charles Tang joining us in Sao Paulo, and Ms. Mary Cruz McGowan joining us there in Washington. Many thanks. Now stay with us on World Insight in our final segment coming up. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry visits India as Washington and New Delhi appear to be strengthening economic and military ties. What will closer relations between the U.S. and India mean to Asian Pacific region, and what are some of the implications for China and other regional players? That's next. Welcome back. Now we turn to New Delhi. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrived in India on Monday. He started a 3-day visit to India and co-chaired the Indo-U.S. Strategic and Commercial Dialogue with the India Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj on Tuesday. The Strategic and Commercial Dialogue is the main bilateral forum for advancing shared security and economic priorities of the United States and India. Now, Kerry is scheduled to meet Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Wednesday. Before our discussion, here's more about the dialogue.
Indo-U.S. ties. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrived in New Delhi to participate in the second Indo-U.S. Strategic and Commercial Dialogue, which was held on Tuesday. Officials from the United States and India were scheduled to discuss a visa and totalization agreement and to deliberate on ways to promote innovation and entrepreneurship. The talks were elevated to the level of a strategic and commercial dialogue during the visit of U.S. President Barack Obama to India in January of 2015. The first S&CD was held in September of 2015 in the United States, which identified the focus areas of strategic and commercial cooperation. The two countries enjoy a thriving trade and investment relationship. U.S.-India bilateral trade increased to $109 billion in 2015. That's up from $37 billion in 2005. Meanwhile, last year, U.S. investment in India reached more than $28 billion, and Indian investment in the United States was more than $11 billion. And Indo-U.S. ties are not only working on the economic side. On Monday, India and the United States inked a long-discussed defense logistics support agreement, which gives both sides access to each other's land, sea, and naval bases for repair and resupply.
It's an enormous change from 50 years of history, and a very substantial advance over just a few months ago. And here's the gist of it. It will allow the United States and India to cooperate, which, speaking from the U.S. point of view, in a way that we do only with our closest and most long-standing allies.
In recent years, the Obama administration and the Modi government have valued each other a lot. But this warm relationship, especially in military cooperation, might raise geopolitical consequences in already tense Asia.
Now, for more on U.S.-India ties, we're now joined in our Beijing studio by Mr. Ye Hailin, Director of the Center for South Asia Studies in the National Institute of International Strategy at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In Washington, D.C., we have Lisa Curtis, Senior Research Fellow on South Asia at the Heritage Foundation. She is formerly a Senior Advisor at the State Department and a diplomat at the U.S. Embassy in India. And also joining us in New Delhi is Mr. Madhav Nalapat. He is UNESCO's Peace Chair and Director of the Geopolitical and International Relations Department at Manipal University. Welcome to you all. So last year, India and U.S. decided to merge their strategic and commercial dialogues into one single platform. Let me start with Professor Ye first. What are the advantages of India's markets for the United States, and what kind of this cooperation will bring to India?
My understanding actually is to conclude President Obama's Indian policy to this year. So it has to get some harvest. Actually, for the last 8 years, Indian-U.S. relationship get a lot of achievements, and this is only one of them. I think in the perspective of the United States, India is not only means a very huge potential market, but also has some strategic value. That's the reason why they go to both ways, security and economics.
And Ms. Curtis, your thoughts on this?
Well, I think India's market has a lot of advantages for the U.S. And one of these is the sheer size of its middle class. There are many opportunities for exports. In fact, U.S. exports to India create hundreds of thousands of jobs here in the U.S. The fact that India is a democracy and there's relative political stability there, that's also an advantage. And I think the fact that Prime Minister Modi has shown that he prioritizes reform of the economy. He may not have been able to move as quickly as people had hoped, but he certainly is moving in the right direction when it comes to making those reforms. And one example is the passage of the GST, the Goods and Services Tax Bill, that was passed through the Indian Parliament recently. So that's moving in the right direction. And I think the U.S. sees a lot of opportunities in expanding economic and investment cooperation with India, but also, as the previous speaker said, there's strategic value for the U.S. in developing its relationship with India.
Now, Mr. Nalapal, let me bring it into the discussion now. What kind of cooperation is India looking specifically for? What the best of it can India get from the cooperation with the United States?
Well, I'd like to point out that India and the United States have been cooperating at various levels from the ground up for a very long time. Indian universities and US universities are partnering across a variety of fields, including biotechnology, medicine, engineering, you name the subject, and Indian and US universities are partnering there. Indian research institutes and US research institutes are partnering. Researchers are going across here and there. We have a 3 million strong Indian American community, and there's a vast flow of humanity across both borders. So the reality is that government is only catching up with what is already happening on the ground, which is a very vigorous engagement between the US and India.
The bilateral mechanism have developed during the Obama years. However, there's one BIT, U.S.-India Bilateral Investment Treaty. Both sides have negotiated for 8 years, but remain apart on intellectual property issues and others. Now, Mr. Ye, do you think that this project could have a breakthrough at this opportunity?
I think so, but we also should notice that President Obama only has a couple of months left. So what's the new president in D.C. will has a new approach on India. I think if the Hillary Clinton take the position, and the Indian-U.S. relation will upgrade in the new level. But if ask the candidate, I mean the Trump, Mr. Trump, there will be some questions. So it remains some uncertain. But we should know India and U.S. relation will be the most stable bilateral relation in the between the big powers. Because of they have the strategic interest, because of they have the common value, but there's only one obstacle lay on the front of the bilateral relationship is their bureaucracy system. Because we all know both countries, when they push something happened, they always take a very long time.
Now, Ms. Curtis, how will the upcoming presidential election there in the United States affect the ties between U.S. and India?
Well, I think there's broad bipartisan support for improving ties with India. We saw that when Prime Minister Modi visited the U.S. a few months ago and addressed a joint session of the U.S. Congress. You saw congressional members from both sides of the aisle really praising the Indian Prime Minister and the Indian people and the forward movement that has been made with U.S.-India ties. So I think whoever is elected in November here in the U.S., I think they will continue the momentum that President Obama has started with the U.S.-India relationship. And we see a commitment to that relationship from India as well under Prime Minister Modi. So I'm pretty bullish when it comes to the continuation of the U.S.-India relationship. And I think there are strategic imperatives from both India and the U.S. They see value in this relationship. They see value in working together, whether it be naval cooperation. You can see this with the recently completed logistics agreement that was just signed here in Washington, D.C. This shows that both sides put real value on the relationship. They have strategic reasons for wanting to grow that relationship. And I see that continuing into the next administration, regardless of who is elected.
Now let's talk about that logistic agreement. Now this is considered a milestone in the ties between U.S. and India military. However, many also point to the fact that this agreement will irritate China, Pakistan, or even Russia. So Mr. Nalapat, I want to get your thoughts on this. What's in it for India?
Well, I'd like to point out that this is a fairly routine agreement that's been signed by the United States with a large number of countries. As far as China is concerned, China has very good relations with both Pakistan and India. And I would like to remind everybody that Pakistan has signed very many more agreements with the United States than India ever has or intends to do. I mean, Pakistan is hosting US troops there. Pakistan has been serving US as bases and various other activities. And nevertheless, there's a very strong bond between China and Pakistan. So we are quite certain that our friends in China will understand and appreciate the reasons why we are signing this agreement, and I think other agreements in the future with the United States. And I'm sure they'll agree that these are not agreements designed to create tension. These are agreements that are designed to ensure that there is synergy between these two countries in the fields of technology and the fields of global security.
Mr. Ye, what do you think it was just been said?
At this point, I agree with Professor Narapat. Actually, we all know there's agreements between India and the US. It's not comparable with the agreements between the US and another alliance, because all the agreements, there's a one principle between the between the India and the US. They have to handle the case by case. That means they won't be spontaneously accessed to the Indian military base by for the American Navy fleets or another military mechanism. So this means it's not a formal military alliance, only some engagement or cooperation. So in this part, I don't think that we have enough reason to see or to foresee these two countries will go into some alliance. So far away to say that. But between China, between US and Australia, between US and Canada, we can say these are formal military ties. But for India and the US, we still think India will value his independence. So I don't think India will so eager to jump into the military ties with network with the United States far away.
So you still think this is far away from a former military alliance?
And I even don't think that's the intention of the Prime Minister Modi. I don't think the India has the policy that to be the member of the United Military Alliance.
Ms. Curtis, for the United States, it seems like Pentagon has made closer military ties with India a priority. I mean, last year established a special unit within Pentagon just to promote cooperation with India, and this is the 6th high-level interactions between two top defense officials. What's the thinking behind this? Because many say that Washington has deliberately wooed New Delhi to become its quasi-ally. What do you think?
Well, I think it is true that under Defense Secretary Ash Carter, we have seen tremendous movement on the U.S.-India defense relationship. Really, defense ties have been at the heart of the improving U.S.-India relationship over the last 2 years. And I would credit Defense Secretary Ash Carter, as well as Indian Defense Minister Manohar Parrikar. They've actually met 6 times in the last few years, and they have made tremendous progress. And Ash Carter has put priority on the India defense relationship since he was Deputy Secretary of Defense. It was under him that the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative, the DTTI initiative, was established 4 years ago. And this is the initiative that seeks to break down bureaucratic obstacles to furthering defense trade. And we have seen the establishment of working groups for the U.S. and India to explore, for example, the co-development of aircraft engines, aircraft carrier technology, and they recently, just this past week, have agreed to establish 5 new working groups to look at other areas of potential U.S.-India co-development or even co-production of certain military technologies. So yes, the U.S. has very much wooed India in terms of improving defense cooperation, but also, you know, India has responded under this current defense minister. The previous defense minister under the previous Congress government had made clear that he was not interested in really moving closer to the U.S. and prioritizing relations with the U.S. And we see a completely different attitude under this current defense minister.
Now, Mr. Nalapad, how close is India willing to go with the United States militarily? Because Mr. Ye just mentioned he thinks that India does not have the intention to form a military alliance with the United States. Give us an Indian perspective.
Well, I'd like to point out that today in the entire Asian region, China is very important for economic prosperity. And it would be a catastrophic situation if there were ever a conflict between the United States and China. I am very certain the leaders of both countries will ensure that such a catastrophe does not take place. So those who are, you know, interpreting this kind of a closer movement of India and the United States as somehow directed against any third country, I believe they are wrong. The important point is we are a country which 800 million people are below the age of 35. They have no memory of any Cold War. They have no memory of the fact that India was an ally of the Soviet Union and the United States was on the other side. This is a new country, and even our civil service, most of the younger people have a very different attitude from those who are 55 and older. So the Cold War is now a fading memory, and the future is beckoning. And so far as the future is concerned, I repeat, the relationships between India and the US in the field of technology, research, education, health are so numerous that it's only proper that a relationship be formalized. There's a huge network of informal relationships, and finally the government is finding the courage to formalize it. I agree with Ms. Carter that in 2002 the Vajpayee government signed an agreement on some information sharing with the US. After that the Congress government did nothing, but now again the Modi government has swung into action, and I believe there's going to be more agreements in the pipeline. These agreements are designed to ensure security and stability throughout Asia. They're designed to fight terrorism, and they're certainly not designed against any country, least of all a country as indispensable to the future of Asia as China.
All right, we still have some more time. I want to briefly just touch upon the dynamics between Pakistan, India, and the United States. Pakistan was once the third largest recipient of Washington's foreign aid, but now economic aid has declined 53% from 2011 to 2015. Security aid fell even more, 73% in the same period. Meantime, India is still the top recipient of U.S. economic assistance. Mr. Ye, how do you look at the dynamics here? As Pakistan and India do not see eye to eye on every issue, can we say that the U.S. has made its choice?
I don't think the United States need to make a choice because there is no balance in the subcontinent. India has the priority is for natural. So I think the Americans' interest or the Americans' policy should targeting on how to make the Pakistan not feel panic, how to enhance the Pakistan's confidence And in this target, I think the China, US, and even for India, we have some common interest that if the Pakistan really suffered from a very severe terrorist attack, or even fell into part, they will be a common disaster for all of us. So I don't think that there's a zero-sum game between India and Pakistan, between US and China.
All right. I wish we had more time, but I gotta go now. But thank you all for your insights. Mr. Ye Hailin joining me in the Beijing studio, and Ms. Lisa Curtis joining us in Washington, D.C., and also in New Delhi, Mr. Madhav Nalapad joining us there. Many thanks for all your perspectives. And that's all we have for today's program. If you'd like to see more, please visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Li Chuya, and everyone on the World Insight team, thank you for watching. And tune in again next time for more insights from across China and around the world.